So, generals, secure, General Cavoli, General Andrzejczak, welcome on board the Peace Strategic Arc 2023. And the first question, very general one, after hearing the speeches of President of Poland and President Zelensky, I think we should start from the question where we are in this war. We are following this war quite closely, as probably nobody else in this room. Where we are, where Ukrainians are in this war, how this war is going in your view. In your view, you are professionals, you are fighters, you are soldiers. You know what's happening. You know, President Zelensky is saying that, you know, his speech, his recording can be interrupted by the missiles coming in Kiev. They have, you know, a lot of work to do to fight with them. So how this war is going? General Cavoli.
Let's solve that.
Goes first.
Yeah, so, I mean, the arc of the war has been not entirely surprising, but brought some moments that did surprise. So in the beginning, it was clear that Russia amassed a very large force, invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine staged what can only be described as a valiant defense, and succeeded in pushing the Russians back from their initial gains. We settled into a long period last summer of stasis along the front, and then the Ukrainians undertook an offensive that was quite successful in liberating large parts of the Kharkiv region, as well as half of Kherson Oblast. And then things settled into the winter, and Russia clearly adopted a strategy of protracting the war and endeavoring to enter into a war of attrition with Ukraine, which, in their opinion, would favor Russia, not Ukraine. Ukraine, on the other hand, has built additional units and has generated offensive capability. It has been done with the assistance of a remarkable voluntary coalition of countries, Poland chief among them. More than 50 countries attend the Ukraine Donor Coordination Group, or Contact Group. And all of these countries came together and supplied arms, but more important, training to our Ukrainian colleagues, and those Ukrainian colleagues now have an offensive capability, and I think we'll see what they do with it.
Thank you much. General Andrzejczak.
Well, we see and we feel the decisive point of the operation is coming, and I hope it will be soon and it will be successful. But always, like Clausewitz theory, the fog of war, and we have to be very, very careful. Militarily, I was mentioned, Chris, we prepare great power and good composition of military instruments to prevent Russian actions, and also to take initiative for offensive operation. But also the very important is that we are in decisive point politically, morally, economically. So it requires a lot of efforts, not only military one, and I move the attention more widely to everybody, absolutely, who cares about the results of the war. So this is a decisive point of this war, I believe.
General Andrzejczak, Poland was the first country that started to send hardware to Ukraine. So I said in my introduction speech, the tempo is of the essence. What we have learned about our armaments, our weapons, from Ukraine, are they using our stuff in an efficient way?
Well, they're using very, very effectively, and this is a good signal. I'll always say that half of my heart is crying when I'm sending equipment, but the other one is very happy because my equipment is extremely effective, and there's also the Ukrainian opinion about the equipment they're receiving. But the lessons learned taken are very long, list of the things we see every day. I would say that first lessons learned is that the war is still natural Russian instrument of making politics. So this is the good reminder for us. And Russia still is doing the politics that way. So we have to remember. Second thing is not only about equipment mentioned by you, but entire Ukrainian nation. Resilience as a state, resilience as a nation, resilience as a culture is absolutely crucial and critical. And we have to think widely how to improve our resilience in Poland, in Eastern flank, and also in NATO and Western civilization to be much more effective, not only in the kinetic, physical aspects, but also information domain and many others. So I see this war as a much more important and for not only for Poland but for region and for the future. So list of the lessons learned taken is fortunately and unfortunately very long.
General Cavoli, Ukrainians are getting more and more modern US equipment. Are we satisfied with the way how this equipment performs until now on the battlefield?
Sure. I think when we look at the employment of weapon systems in Ukraine, we can divide it up into the quality of the weapons themselves and then the way that they are employed. With regard to the quality of weapon systems themselves, I think the main lesson is if you own Russian-built equipment, you should get rid of it as quickly as possible. It's simply not as effective. Western arms have proven far, far superior. The method of employment, though, is really the key. And the Ukrainians have proven unbelievably adept at quickly adopting new technologies, to include technologies maybe not familiar to them or procedures not familiar, and employing them almost immediately on the battlefield. The training periods to train up on Leopard tanks or on the M1s that they're starting on this month, or even the Patriot system, the training periods were not long. They were quite abbreviated compared to the way we train our own soldiers. So I really think it's not just the quality of Western arms, it's the combination with the ingenuity and the skill of the Ukrainian soldiers.
We have just learned that Ukrainians managed to shoot down Russian supersonic missiles, Kinjal by hypersonic missiles using Patriots. Were you aware that we are able to do that before the systems were had been provided to Ukrainians?
Right. Well, we know that the system is very good. We're extremely happy that Poland has chosen the system along with some others. But we can't really speak publicly about exactly what we know about its exact capabilities. But we were very pleased to see that report come out of Ukraine.
General Andrzejczak, we know Russian way of war very well. I mean, sitting in the Central Europe, it is something we are very much familiar with. Russians perform in Ukraine exactly the same tactics based on quantity. How we should think about our own defense? Does it quality trumps quantity still? Do we have enough equipment? Do we have enough ammunition? How we should think about defending ourselves against this kind of tactic, against the Russian way of war?
So first of all, Poles, historically, we are not surprised about the performance of Russians because in being in the space for a pretty long time, 1,000 years, we remember everything. Not only 1939 and then the cutting what happened, the performance of Red Army in Berlin, and the same is in Afghanistan, Chechnya, Syria, the poisoning, NH-17, and entire list, including a very symbolical Smolensk. So we're not surprised, and the Russians respect only power, and this is no question about it. They're talking about the quantity and quality. The first observation that I have from Ukraine, not everything is ready to translate into what we're doing, because Ukraine still is not yet in NATO, but I hope will be soon. And also, it's a slightly different geography and situation. So, talking about quality and quantity, there'll be a couple of interesting observations on fifth-generation airplanes. They are not in the combat. We are on the way. So, in the very short time, Poland will receive F-35s, the same Patriot, which is really interesting. What we discussed with Chris. Space, cyber, autonomous platforms, robotic, fighting. And so not everything is the same. So we carefully observing situation in Ukraine and trying to design army capable and also fit to the situation. But in the end of the day, really, no matter how many modern technology and the cyber issues and satellite pictures you have, in the end of the day, you need a tank, you need the infantry, you need artillery to prevent. So the combination of quantity and quality is a critical, that what we'll say.
General Cavoli, it's no surprise that Poles know very well how Russians are fighting and how Russia's way of war looks like. But what about other allies? You are, the commander of allied forces in Europe. So what about those nations sitting away of this conflict?
Well, I think just like Rajmund said, Poland is doing, all allies are studying this conflict extremely closely. And truth be told, most of our allies had been focused on the Russian military and the Russian way of war since 2014. It may not have translated out into dramatic policy all the time or something, but the militaries have been fairly focused on it. I think to build off of what Rajmund just said about quantity and quality, it's a very important question. Our Western theory for defeating Russian mass has always been to use precision to defeat the mass. And we do see in the Ukrainian use of high-end systems that it works. However, it takes time. And to gain that time, because if you hit the logistics system with precision weapons, it doesn't produce a change that day on the front. It's a downstream effect. And in order to gain the time to let the precision beat the mass, typically you have to trade space. And when we see what's happened to the space that was traded in Ukraine, that's not something we want for our allies or for anybody. And so I think there has to be a good balance of mass against mass combined with precision and quality to fight a deeper fight and erode it more quickly. One without the other does not work very well.
You mentioned time, precision, but what about range? Brits have just provided Ukraine with very precise long-range missile. Do you think it's going to be a game changer in this war? How exactly this weapon system can change the battlefield?
So I think this is a super important question, because we sometimes get very fixed on the exact weapons or what has been given, what has not been given. There is no such thing as a game changer, right? I mean, everything has to work as a system. You have to be able to strike the enemy deep, middle, and close. You have to be able to do it simultaneously. You have to be able to find, otherwise it does no good to be able to strike. You have to be able to do everything. And it is much better to have pretty good capabilities that are holistic and integrated than it is to have one excellent capability that is not combined with other things. So I think that there is no silver bullet. There just has to be good, solid combinations of the equipment available.
Yes, talking about holistic approach. Ukrainians are getting ready for their counter-offensive. Can they be successful in this effort without air power? The question to General Andrzejczak, because they are lacking air power, and Russians still have superiority in the air. So how to think about the holistic approach in counter-offensive without air power?
It's not easy question. I would say the war is not only about equipment. I totally agree. There's no Wunderwaffen. We know it from history. Although it's very well known, the V1, V2 Tiger tanks, and including elephants of Hannibal. So it doesn't work that way. So the strategy matters. And to defeat an enemy, going back to Sun Tzu, I'm not sure whether it would be a good quote because the quote is made in China, but. But he said, you have to break a will, you have to destroy alliances, and then you have to beat the army. So Russians are not successful in breaking Ukrainian will. Whatever we do, we should support this element. So empowering the will of fight and imagination of victory. Second thing is breaking alliances. That's the good lessons they're taken. You cannot survive if you are alone. And I think Greece will never, in a couple of good years, the examples that presenting alliances matters, support matters, friends matters, credible neighbors. And the last is breaking army. And I still believe that we sent enough for this certain operational, situation. And I have a fully trust for performance of Ukrainian soldiers. But again, I would like to emphasize is more about the financial issues, economy, social aspects, and the support should be much wider, not only considering the military domain.
General Cavoli, President Zelensky mentioned in his address to the strategic arc fighting Falcons, F-16s. Do you think that Ukrainian fighters would be able to use it quickly? Or because, as we read assessment that actually to train fighting pilot, you need 2 to 5 years. They don't have so much time. When this fighting Falcons can do the difference on the battlefield in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, clearly it's much easier for the Ukrainian side to adopt MiG-29s from Poland or from Slovakia because the pilots are already trained, but much more important, the maintenance systems, the logistics systems appropriate for that airframe are already in place. So to use modern air power, it's an entire system of systems that involves highly trained people on the ground, not just in the cockpit. There are a lot of things. So it's not an easy thing to put together. It's much easier to add to an existing system, which has been the approach so far. But I'd like to go back to the question of what's the point? The point is that in a war, a side needs to control its airspace so that its airspace can't be used to attack its soldiers. And there are many ways to control the airspace. You can control the airspace from the ground. In fact, the Russians have never, not one day during this entire conflict, established air superiority. That's because of ground-based air defenses from the Ukrainians. You also want to use the air to strike the enemy. The Ukrainians have been doing that in unbelievably innovative ways with drones, many of the drones produced by themselves. So the question is part of a much larger complex of how to wage the war. And it goes back to the fact that there's no wonder weapon. There's all systems that have to be employed as systems.
Next question is about the adaptation of your structures. I mean, your headquarters, your command chains. So, General Andrzejczak, how Polish armed forces have adapted to the experience of the battlefield in Ukraine? What has changed in your headquarters?
There's a lot of changes and still dynamic. We're observing, very important. In a couple of weeks, we go, politically, we're going to the Vilnius NATO summit. There will be a lot of important decisions, and then going to the Joint Cavoli office as well, and the new force model, so the executability of the plans. So we're considering most of the issues are classified, so please give us a time. But we see a lot of good dynamics, how to improve the structure in the strategical level, but also going down to the certain national domain and Polish army, what we're doing, just related to the range you mentioned and our ability for long-range fires. We're just receiving, the F-35s coming soon, and the Prime Minister Morawiecki was in the States and talking about the long-range systems. So it's absolutely going in a good direction, but momentum and speed is a critical. So I'm really touched that most useful word to last night and today is speed, is momentum, is time factor is critical. It's not everything about what we're doing and how big the support is, numbers, but the proper timing is crucial.
Talking about time, how much SHAPE has changed? How much time you devote to follow?
A little bit more busy, I think.
Follow the battleground and what's happening in Ukraine.
So, while it's very hard to overstate the changes in the military structures of the alliance right now. So coming out of Madrid last year, there was political direction to SACIR to complete a family of plans. And so we have just turned in regional plans that are the first time in more than 30 years that the alliance has objective plans, militarily sound plans to defend every part of the alliance. This is a huge advance because it allows us to drive many things.
Every single inch.
Every inch, Poland.
Or centimeter, we say in Poland.
So this drives a lot, right? First of all, it drives a force structure requirement. Once you have plans in place, you know how many forces easily. So we've talked about 2% for years. Now we actually have plans-based capabilities targets that we can develop that will help nations guide their national defense investment plans. And so we can be focused by the right things, combine current possibilities and current capabilities with future capabilities in the right patterns. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it drives new readiness requirements, right? If you have plans and indications and warnings, you have different readiness requirements and a different regimen of studying and evaluating readiness. The third thing, it'll bring changes in command and control. You asked about what's changed in SHAPE. SHAPE is changing back into a warfighting headquarters that is capable of managing and directing operations through three major subordinate commands, the Joint Force Commands in Brunssum, Norfolk, and Naples, to deliver military effects inside areas of responsibility that are established and approved. These are just massive changes, and they will have a very, very good effect on national defense planning too, because they combine with national defense plans. So there's a huge amount changing inside our headquarters and every place else. But as General Andrzejczak said, speed is everything, right? So we need to get these plans into place and executable with assigned forces, properly manned headquarters, and all of the systems exercised before Russia reemerges from this conflict and decides to threaten NATO again.
I will come back to the planning thing, but General Cavoli, you mentioned that SHAPE is actually in a kind of the war mode already. What we are hearing from the Russian leaders, from messages coming from the Kremlin and Moscow, is that Russia is at war with the West. Russia is at war with NATO. So I would like to ask General Andrzejczak first, are we at the war with Russia?
Well, Russia is permanently at war. Russia is in war in high intensity, low intensity, new generation, cyber, hybrid, political energy. So this is the state of mind of Russians to be at war and using any kind of assets with predominantly military instruments of power. The question is, you can answer both way. Let's say, and according to law, not. This is not NATO war with Russia. And if you're going a little bit higher with the much more philosophical question, I would say, well, my tanks and my artillery pieces are fighting effectively. 8 million Ukrainians crossed the border, and some of them still living in Poland. A lot of investments we're doing. So this is a very good question for everybody. How do you feel? How do you really feel? Do you really want to win? I was really touched last night when Professor Cohen, he quoted the John Paul II, being here in Warsaw and being American. He said, "Do not afraid."
At the square.
Absolutely, and that was the sentence. And I said, well, do not afraid to think about the victory. Do not afraid of fight, and do not afraid to win, because Russia is beatable in that way, in that war.
Just a comment for the audience. Don't be afraid you didn't attend the speech, the lecture given by Professor Cohen. The speech is going to be published, is going to be available for the general public, so don't worry, you will get it.
No, I'd like to answer the same question from the alliance-wide perspective, however. The answer is no. NATO is not at war with Russia, and it's a mischaracterization from the Russian side to claim that. All of the plans I just described are defensive plans because NATO has always been a defensive alliance. So SHAPE is not at war. SHAPE is in the business of conducting active deterrence measures. That is what I'm instructed to do right now, is to provide deterrence across the entire alliance.
So the one sentence, Sławek, Russia would like to have such a narrative that we are in a war because it works for Russians. So in that context, we say no. But still, it's very much important question how much we supporting Ukraine and all of those efforts. If we morally are engaged and supporting in every kind of activity, there'll be good intellectual exercise for everybody.
Talking about defense, NATO is moving from a strategy of deterring Russia by the punishment towards the strategy based on deterring Russia by denial. How much difference does it make for SHAPE, for you generals, for you, Rajmund, to move from one strategy to another? What's the difference?
Well, if I could start, the difference in a military sense is you have to move forces to the point of need faster. Right, they either have to be there, but that's very difficult because we now have more than 3,000 kilometers of frontage with Russia, which is a named adversary of NATO. So it's hard to predict exactly what the correct location to forward station forces is. But you also have to have them able to move to the point of need very quickly at the time of need, and that time distance factor is the biggest challenge of moving from one modus to the other. It's got a lot to do with things like military mobility, which we've been talking about for years, improving the trafficability of our routes, improving the procedures to get from one country to another, making sure our ports are owned by friendly corporations or governments and not adversaries or potential adversaries, and all of that feeds into this.
The simplest answer would be not Bucha anymore. No way. So we don't want to wait until any kind of the Russian forces penetration and going deep into Poland and then defending and preparing counterattacks. The change of philosophy is to build as effective, as credible system that attack would not be possible. That's the most important message we would like to send. No Bucha anymore.
Okay, but what does it mean in practice? How close to the border you would like to have your forces? Because it's about range, it's about the time. But both criteria are interconnected. Closer they are, faster you can react. So Is it enough to have them, I don't know, in West Germany, or you would prefer to have them somewhere in the Baltic states or in Poland?
Well, there has to be a balance, and when I talk about my forces, I'm talking about all the forces in the alliance. There has to be a balance between forward defense, and typically that's going to be accomplished by nations, right? Article 3 comes before Article 5. And so typically nations will establish the forward defense, and other nations that aren't on the front line will need to be in a position where they're very ready, highly mobile, and placed for agility. And so it depends plan by plan where exactly that is, but it's a combination of a balanced stance.
So the answer is easy: more troops closer to the borders, credible forces with the capability to engage in the big distances, but also new capabilities, space, cyber. But then again, I would like to emphasize it's not only about the numbers of brigades and tanks, it's also about the production of ammunition, it's about resilience of a state, awareness, and the peacetime orientation, crisis, effectiveness, and then finally we're going to the military. But it's much more important, and Ukraine is effective not only because the brave performance of Ukrainian soldiers, but the entire nation is fighting.
And the alliance and nations have moved forces farther east in response to this conflict. Poland, of course, creating the 18th Armored Division. That's going to be a very big deal. There are 4 new multinational NATO battle groups since last year in frontline states. Other nations have increased their force structure and placed it closer to the borders. So I think there's been a significant movement. To fight a large fight like we see in Ukraine, though, it's going to require a large reinforcement, and it's my job to make that fast in conjunction with nations.
Okay, but it's also about the size of the force you would like to have. It's about time, about range, but also quantity. So how big force you would like to have to effectively deter Russia, to effectively implement the strategy of deterrence by denial? Because this deterrence can be credible and can be not credible.
Right.
So you need to convince the opponent that first you will be quick enough, you will be precise enough, you will be close enough, but also that you will have enough troops, enough ammunition. So how to do that? How big force you would like to have, General?
So if you're asking soldiers, the answer will be never enough, more. But of course, we have to keep the balance between 3% of GDP we're investing and money, and all of the implications with economy and demography. So to keep in balance, that's what I said in the very beginning. It's not only Poland. It's the alliance is NATO, and we would like to be an inspiration for everybody else. And I think we should consider not only numbers, but also capabilities, the coming, multi-domain concepts, space and cyber. And also it's important to understand that defense of Poland starts in the education of very, very young, the people, Poles, about awareness, about the support, relations, trust, and alliances. So I will keep for a while the numbers of brigades, and finally with John Cavoli, we synchronize in the plans, but soldiers' answer will be never enough. Give me more.
So we have delivered a force structure requirement based on our plans. It's not public, of course, yet. Nations are considering it, but it will be one of the drivers of the NATO defense planning process, which establishes the capabilities targets that nations then use to help design their forces. It's entirely doable, the size of the force structure requirement we have. We can do it. The alliance has a big military force when it assembles it all together. Part of the question is making it available to Allied command operations for operations. This is one of the reasons that the regional plans began with host nation defense plans, so that we could optimize and maximize the use of troops across the alliance. But I think we'll have some growing to do in some areas, especially. I think if we look at our logistics and sustainment capabilities, nation by nation, we have some work to do. I think if we look at our ground-based air defense systems, we'll probably grow a lot there. But all these will be decisions that nations have to take as we go forward, but they're all entirely doable.
Okay, General, you mentioned capabilities. So let me mention General Bonaparte. We both know his way of war very well. We mentioned his name in our national anthem, that Bonaparte showed us how to fight. I know that Anglo-Saxons have a different view about him, but just for...
I'm actually of Italian heritage.
but just for as a point of departure, Bonaparte says that three things he needs to fight the war: money, money, money. General Zaluzhny, who actually was invited to join this panel, but last week he told us, "Sorry guys, I have a war to win," so he was unable to be here. But in one of his conversations, public conversation, he said that he needs three things: ammunition, ammunition, ammunition. So about our capabilities. Are we doing enough to have enough ammunition, ammunition, ammunition? Because money, I think money is the issue of money is getting better and better. I mean, countries at least in NATO eastern flank are spending more than the pledge adopted in the world. So what about ammunition? How we could convince the public that it's not only about precision, it's not about weapons, it's not about quantity of troops, but about ammunition, about logistics. How to do this?
Well, I was studying close to Brno in the Czech Republic, and there's a small village called Slavkov u Brna, which is Austerlitz. So I studied carefully, and Napoleon also said the morale factor is multiplicates the physical aspect. So money is important, but he said as well what we have in our hearts and minds is even more important. But anyway, going to the material world. There was a huge change right now. It's not about money. We got the money, but it's the time, again. Time, how to change production and our effectiveness. It was a huge discussion. I've been to US, and I was talking to General Milley as well, how to change our effectiveness in production, because war in Ukraine is a war of attrition. Russian army, the speed of attrition is too slow, and the speed of attrition in Ukraine as a state and as an army is very high. We cannot accept. So we change a lot of things. You can find in the programs of Mr. President and Prime Minister many governmental decisions about to invest and to increase our capability in the production, as well as European Union efforts, but also in the bilateral relations as well. So there was a huge change, I think the biggest in NATO. But still, again, time is crucial. So send of time is running low.
So the promises of money are largely there, the intention to spend, the money's beginning to flow in most nations, but it's got to go someplace. And industry is not absorbing the investments and producing as quickly as we would hope. I can say that pretty evenly across the Western world. So this question of industrial capacity as an essential part of our ability to wage war is fundamental. And it is something that has atrophied and needs to come back. And a case in point is ammunition. Our plans are also driving a new ammunition stockpile requirement. But I have no illusions that it will be like a light switch where we declare the requirement, somebody pulls out a checkbook, and now it's fulfilled. It's gonna take some time, because industry has to reestablish capacity. The capability's there, but the capacity in some cases is not as elastic as we would hope.
Just one housekeeping comment. Both our speakers, generals, have agreed to take a few questions. So on the topic, on the helping of Ukraine. So you can start thinking about your questions. Now I would like to come back to my great panelists, generals and ammunition. There is a lot of talk in the United States, in public, that U.S. Army, U.S. Armed Forces don't have enough ammunition to help Ukraine, that this assistance should stop because there is a contingency in the Pacific, and you are running out of stocks, and helping Ukraine too much may expose the United States to the other challenges, other threats. How you read this kind of debate?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that debate is not limited to the United States, right? I hear it in many other nations as well. Well, in the United States, I can't speak for all other nations, but in the United States, we work very carefully to examine the Ukrainians' requests, their needs, their requirements as we understand them, and also the readiness requirements of U.S. Armed Forces. And based on sort of that three-way combination of factors, we determine how much and what we can give. But I would say that up to this point, using those three criteria, there is still ammunition flowing, and there are still weapons flowing. So we should take some confidence from that.
General Andrzejczak, we have just heard that there are plans to build a new factories, for production ammunition in Poland, also for HIMARS and other stuff. Do we think only about NATO, NATO eastern flank, or we think about these new capabilities in more as our contribution to allied effort, allied capabilities, free world capabilities, because there are other contingencies that these capabilities may be needed?
Well, what we see in the Ukraine right now is probably bigger thing that we could imagine in a couple of months or a couple of years before. If we're losing Ukraine, which is absolutely out of my imagination, can you imagine our investments when the Russian army will be, in Belarus and Brest and Lviv and anywhere else? So for those that don't believe and they have a slightly relaxed mode, I would say, well, let's imagine such a situation. This is everybody's business. And talking about the U.S., I'm not, responsible for Taiwan and all of those challenges you're facing every day, but certain and critical Polish capabilities are coming from South Korea, tanks and artillery. So if we're not helping, collectively, U.S. solve some of the problems, there will be a huge, change in that kind of geometry. So this is the people say the regional conflict, but I would say it's a global challenge. Everybody's in the business and everybody has something to do concerning, for example, ammunition.
Okay. NATO summit in Vilnius is ahead of us. So I will ask both of you generals, what do you expect? What do you like to hear from the leaders gathered in Vilnius in beginning of July? What kind of the directives and decisions would like to see there to help you to build this deterrence credible enough to mobilize our potential and to protect our societies, because you are doing this job on the first line. You are not doing this job just to train troops. You are on the first line of shielding our societies against the threats coming from the East. So what you would like to hear from our leaders in the Vilnius summit?
So I'm not a politician, active duty soldier, so I'm waiting for mission and for tasks from my subordinates, but I would say we need decisions, the common decisions, sending message to Russia that enough means enough. Of course, all of the elements supporting mentioned new force model, the adaptation of NATO. Our guidance is clear. We We need more authority to the succor, which will be a measurement of our effectiveness. If he knows what's going on and he got our authority to observe indication and warnings, we will be much more effective in deterrence and defense. So that's our message.
Well, obviously, like Rajmund, I don't want to get ahead of our political leaders. They have enough on their mind. They don't need an amateur to help them. On the other hand, I think one of the important things that could be done at Vilnius is the full adoption of the plans, the family of plans, and all of the consequential things. This is all about adapting NATO. I think it's clear that there are other more political decisions that are going to be on the table. Defense investment pledges, our relationship with Ukraine, Sweden, and other things like that. But the one that matters, you know, as a purely military matter, is to get the plans into place, to get everybody to agree that they're going to fulfill the plans and make them executable this year.
Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I open the floor for questions. Please introduce yourself first.
Thank you very much indeed. Benjamin Tallis, German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you, Generals, for an enlightening conversation. I want to push a little bit further, though. The function of the alliance traditionally has been at least twofold. One, to provide capabilities. The second, to ensure our collective will to fight. I think it's fair to say that in both fields, which are interconnected, it's an unevenness across the alliance. It's stronger in some places than others. How do we ensure, taking what General Andrzejczak said as a whole-of-society approach, that we actually stiffen that collective will to fight in order that we don't have to? We may argue if deterrence is successful, but how do we increase that, and what would be good indicators or demonstrations of that? Thank you.
Well, I think Elliot Cohen pointed out a couple of good things last night. The role of public intellectuals such as yourself in persuading nations and populations of the importance of a will to fight. You might describe the will to fight as uneven across the alliance. I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think that's what you're saying. But I look at it again as the glass half empty, half full. There is a more unified will in the alliance than I have seen in 36 years of service. I have never seen the level of unanimity and unity as we see now and for the past year. And I really mean that sincerely. As I travel around, I hear people fear about it, you know, but we could lose the unity. But when I go to capitals and consult with political leaders, when I sit in Brussels, I just don't hear the lack of unity. It's an amazing thing. So I'm very gratified by it. But of course, building more unity and sustaining unity is always critical. And I think sessions like this have a lot to do with our ability to do that, because it's about persuading our populations of the importance of the issues.
Well, a good question. But if you ask in Polish here in Warsaw, I would say in any kind of level. So what the President Duda is saying, you saw a couple of seconds before relations and his contribution and an effort to do. Also government, in the social domain, you saw the Polish performance from the very beginning. In the military domain, training, maintenance, and sending equipment. So that's what we're doing, and we are second donator. What we would like to do is, as Chris mentioned, is much wider discussion for intellectuals, for media, for those who are active in the debate, to just to take care about what we're doing and what we see. Not only is a good question, but you know, probably not only for me.
Thank you very much. Anton LaGuardia of The Economist. General Andrzejczak, you spoke about this being a decisive moment, a decisive point in the war. Can you explain that in clearer terms? And what do you see, what do both of generals see coming afterwards? What happens after the counteroffensive? Is there talking and fighting? What scenarios do you envisage? And which side has the advantage in a long war if this drags on beyond this year?
Well, decisive point of the operation of war, but I would like to mention again, war starts as a political act and ends as a political act. So this is a part of the bigger bigger mechanism. If the operationally and militarily they are successful, then we need some translation into the political language. So probably not a question for us. And well, that would be my answer.
I would agree with him.
Okay.
Thanks, Slavik, and thanks, Generals, for a great panel. Mick Ryan, a fellow at the CICIS and a couple other institutions. I want to talk about people. We've talked a lot about the 30 years of degradation of defence industry in the West, but at the same time we were doing that, we were actually making our military forces smaller and exquisitely professional. Now, that's been a good thing up until now. Has Ukraine shown us that we need to move beyond the all-volunteer, all-professional forces to an expandable, mobilised organisation in Western military institutions? And do you think military institutions and the political class are up for that shift?
I think it's a great question. I would never dare to answer it in front of a chief of defense who's actually responsible for things like that. I am blessedly just the beneficiary of the forces that chiefs of defense produce. I would simply observe that across the alliance, a number of allies have examined this question of returning to conscription or a broader basis of providing manpower, and many have adopted, or some have adopted, non-voluntary systems.
Well, I wouldn't be so reactive if we see any challenge. Immediately, we're going back to some points of reference from history and implement Cold War time 2.0 structure. In Poland, we have a fully professional operational troops, as well as a territorial defense, new form of linking the social activity, working and being a soldier, as well as voluntary conscriptions. One of the reasons I've been to Finland and Sweden was also observing how they approach. But again, it's not only about the numbers of the troops, but the awareness of society. So I would say the good combination of active component and then reserve forces or active reserve, territorial defense, volunteers, and any other elements would be the answer. I wouldn't go back to the 70s and conscription and 500,000 of army will be solution for combat effectiveness.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time, so there is nothing to do more. But I would like to all of you to join me in rising applause for our great leaders, great soldiers, and great protectors of our freedom and our values. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.